Okay, so short and sweet. We've got Cody Parker, who is one of the Agriculture and Natural Resources Extension agents. He's been here for about 6 months, a little over 6 months, almost 7 months. And tonight he's going to be talking to us about weed science and management in residential areas. So, Cody, take it away.
All right, like you said, I'm Cody Parker. A little bit more about my background. I worked at Beach Haven Vineyards and Winery for 3 years after college as an assistant winemaker and a vineyard production manager. So if you got questions about grapes, I can try to answer those for you as well. After that, I moved to co-op as an agronomy associate, which is where we actually, our biggest problem with weeds. So I worked there for about 4 years as an agronomist or an agronomy associate and moved on from there to here. So we're just going to go ahead and dive right in. How my clicker ain't working. Okay. There we go. All right, so a little bit of an outline for our discussion. Kind of going over what are weeds, the different types and classifications of weeds, and a few specific examples that I brought in and some on the PowerPoint. How weeds actually disperse their seeds, that's a big one, because that's, if we ever want to control them, we have to know how to keep them from doing that. And basically just using the different control methods, trying to integrate those into our practices. All right, so what we kind of want to go over and become familiar with is the definition of a weed. What is a weed? Understanding the negative impacts they can have on us and our gardening and our practices. And being able to connect treatments with weed types. So that's a big one. There's certain weeds that you have to take care of different ways. Okay, so what is a weed? These are a couple of different quotes from people that kind of go over what they thought a weed was. My favorite is actually the bottom one, right? The bottom one. Plants that are competitive, persistent, and pernicious, that are basically interfering with human activities and as a result are undesirable. Undesirable being the keyword. So when we think about a weed, we got to think about the location. Is it growing outside of its normal habitat? Where is it growing? And why is it in the middle of my yard? Then we got to go to growth. If it is outperforming and basically has a competitive advantage over what our desired plan is, that's when we really got to start looking into what it is and how we control it. And then interference. Of course, now weeds can come in shape, all different shapes, forms, and size, but they can also start causing your sidewalks to crack, grass growing through your sidewalk. So they can interfere with the structures of your house and stuff like that. But by definition, a weed is a plant growing, any plant growing in an undesired location that is in competition with desired plants. So, for example, Bermuda grass in a fescue yard. Well, the Bermuda grass is a weed because it's in your fescue yard competing with your fescue. On the flip side, fescue in a Bermuda grass yard, fescue is the weed because it's competing with Bermuda. So anything can be a weed as long as it's not in the right location or undesired. So just kind of applying the criteria here. First picture, we have actually what looks to be some pretty good weed control. Got a little bit of grass growing right down here, but that's not a big issue. So then moving on, if my clicker will keep working. There we go. Now you can see we do have a problem. We have a bunch of dandelions growing in our yard. They're out feeding our grass, causing our grass to kind of die off and starve for nutrients. This is when a weed becomes a problem. This right here is Chinese privet in a wood line, and the problem with it is it's eventually going to shade out and cause non-native species to be able to grow. So it gets really thick and grows very, very quick. And lastly, we have just some grass on the sidewalk here that I imagine was pulled out of the plant bed. And as you can see, I mean, if you got grass that thick, you've got a problem. So first, let's focus on why they're a problem. So weeds become a problem because of how rapidly they can grow. They're going to outcompete our other species and get to seed maturity very, very quickly. They reproduce multiple ways, some by seed, some by vegetative, such as rhizomes, stolons, and tubers. And they don't have to have a specialized pollinization. They can self-pollinate and be good to go. So, a few more characteristics of what a weed is. They typically have a deep, rapid rooting. That's what's giving them most of their competitive advantage for water and nutrients. And they adapt very, very quickly to their environment. So they start becoming bitter so that certain livestock won't graze on them or animals won't graze on them, stuff like that, which makes them have no natural enemies on them. They also tend to adapt very quickly to any environment. And the resistance and control strategies, that's more for your farmers. As an agronomist, I will say you would be surprised at what Roundup and dicamba and 2,4-D won't kill nowadays because it just became so resistant. You hit them with it, it's almost like you hit them with fertilizer at this point. So, what are some of the negative impacts we can have? Well, for farmers, it's going to reduce their crop yields and basically reduce their bottom line. They're not going to make as much profit. Forage and hay value. Now that, I mean, if I walk up to a bale of hay and I see that it's full of weeds instead of full of grass, I'm paying pennies on the dollar instead of full price for that hay. I'm just not going to pay full price. Another big problem is that they will host a bunch of different diseases, be viruses or fungus or insects that they can bring into your garden, into your yard. This is where we can really start running into that issue. And another big one is the allergies and toxicities. Up here I have an example of ragweed. Ragweed has the most pollen this time of year in September. This is like the prime time of the year for it to have pollen. And it's kind of what causes hay fever, mostly. Oh, well, you're welcome. But another big thing is, of course, they can be visually unappealing. I mean, you have a nice green yard and then you have one weed sticking out in the middle of it. Who wants to see that, right? And if it gets bad enough, it will eventually decrease your land value. So, one thing I will say when trying to manage your weeds and control your weeds is be reasonable with your expectations. This is a full-time crew working on a golf course, and it is absolutely stunningly beautiful. That's not going to happen every day. We can only do so much, and we can only put so much money into it. This is just be aware of your own expectations and what you can do. Also, when approaching how to take care of weeds, we need to realize that there's many different ways that we can, and sometimes it takes multiple ways. Sometimes it takes one way. But as you can see here, we have some row covers that are helping with weed coverage. Here we've got some mulching practices that are helping seeds not germinate to ever become a weed. And then, of course, manual little elbow grease in the garden. So hopping right into invasive species. So an invasive species is essentially any non-native plant to our ecosystem whose introduction is going to cause detrimental economic or environmental damage, whether that be costing you to get it removed or just hurting our ecosystem. And now a very small percent of non-natives actually do become invasive. I don't know the actual percentage, but it's very small. Problem is the ones that do become invasive are the ones that we have to worry about. They take over extremely quickly and they can really hurt an ecosystem. There's a very small chance that native plants can become invasive and they're not going to hurt the environment as much as our actual invasive plants, but just keep that in mind. So when we're dealing with an invasive species, what should we do? Well, first, being able to detect an invasive species early when it's just started to grab a hold of an ecosystem is detrimental to this process. If we can get it early, it's a lot easier to eradicate the problem before it becomes a major problem. Next, we need to realize the extent of ecological damage that it can cause. So if I let this go to next year, what's going to happen? If I let it go the year after that, how much worse is it? And the next is the cost. I mean, really the cost of management. Don't break the bank trying to don't break the bank trying to take care of them. But I mean, at some point, we have to do something about it. So does anyone know what this is right here? This is actually Princess Tree. This is listed as one of the most severe threats in Tennessee as of right now. It's most commonly seen along roadsides and disturbed soil sites, and it grows very rapidly. This one tree can grow up to 15 foot in one summer. So, and yes, it is, but unfortunately, because it can grow 15 feet in 1 year, we got to be worried about it. You know what I mean? But it's easily identified by the pink flowers on it. They grow up to about 2 inches long, and then the leaves on it are oval and heart shaped, and they get about 5 to 26 inches, somewhere in between. No, I do not believe so. Most plants on the invasive species list are not sold, with the exception of a couple. I'll get into. Oh, really? Now in some cases governments have restricted the sale of. Yeah. And on that first couple slides I showed y'all with the bushes in the wood line, this is Chinese privet. It was actually introduced in the 1800s as an ornamental plant. It flourishes along fence rows, streams, and wood lines. And the problem with it is how thick it can get, as y'all can see right here. So all this under here that's so small, it's not getting any sunlight and not getting any nutrients because the Chinese privet's still in it. So these are natives down here trying to grow, but they can't grow because they're being covered up by basically what's essentially a mat. Anyone know what this is? This is actually multifloral rose. It was introduced in 1866 as an ornamental rose. Problem is, it also grows rapidly and can take over small patches of forest in just one summer. Yep. Mm-hmm. That's because of how thick it can get. So that's just kind of to show you how thick this stuff really does get. Canes on this can grow up to 1 to 2 feet in a week. So that's how fast these are growing. And basically what this is going to do is create a monoculture thicket that's going to also suppress our native plants from growing. That's what our ecosystem. So anyone else know any examples of any invasive species? Gutsu. Gutsu's a good one. Honeysuckle. Honeysuckle is another good one. What was that? I'm not sure. Asian wisteria? Okay. Gutsu. Gutsu's a big one. And then also mimosa trees is what I have on my list. Huh? Tree of Heaven, yeah, Tree of Heaven's another great. So as you see, there's a bunch of examples of invasive species. What we need to do is be able to identify them and promote alternatives to them. So if you hear your neighbors fixing to put in their driveway with a bunch of rough repairs, we need to go to something else. I think y'all recommend serviceberry, correct? Yeah. So that's the biggest thing, and that's actually what my next slide is going to lead into.
One on the sticks. Yes.
And they're real bad. They're also real bad about splitting. Really, the Bradford bears are invasive because of how problematic they are. Carla, what else? would you say? Right. Yeah. Mm, right. And that's another thing. Like I said, we have to be, yeah, we have to be reasonable in our control methods. So, what can we do as gardeners about invasive species? Well, like I said, be aware of the species. Be aware of what we're trying to prevent from being planted, and know what we're seeing. Promote less problematic alternatives. All the time I hear Carla talking to people about taking Bradford pears out of the equation and putting in service berries. This is one of the big ones. We don't want people purposely planting these certain species of plants. Right, right. Yeah, right. Well, if you wait long enough, they're going to have to replace some stuff. So, like I said, promote less problematic alternatives like service berries. And then share information with your neighbors, friends, people around you, because if they're fixing to plant something that has a problem, chances are for long you're going to have a problem. So just keep that in mind. Always help always help out by participating in restoration and removal projects. And always just be balanced in your approach. Understand we're not asking you to break the bank. We're just asking you to be mindful and try to help out as much as possible. All right, moving into some weed types, classification, and examples. So we have three different main types of weeds. We have broadleaf, which is like your dandelions, your pigweed, and your lamb's quarter. We have grasses, which is like Bermuda grass, Dallas grass, crabgrass. And like I said before, any grass can be considered a weed depending on where it's grown. I know for a fact that crabgrass and Bermuda grass are actually, for farmers, they don't mind it because it's a great summer annual forage. So when our cool season grasses start dying off, they come in and give their cows something to eat. Yeah, Johnson grass is actually a really great forage. Uh, and sedges. So, can anyone tell me the difference in how you can tell if it's a grass or a sedge? So, grass has a round stem. So, if you roll in your palm, it's going to feel round and like it rolls smooth. Sedges have a triangular stem, and when you roll, it's going to feel like it's bumping all across your hand. That's how you can tell if it's grass or a sedge, essentially.
Down. Way down.
All right. So just to kind of give y'all an idea, broadleaf weeds, they're going to have nice big broadleaf that, veins in the leaves are kind of netted and kind of come out to the sides, and they can be herbaceous or woody. Now your grasses, of course, they're gonna have the narrow leaf, and the veins are gonna run parallel with. So going over the life cycle of some of these annuals, of course, they're one season and done. They're gonna germinate from seed and flower and produce seed all in 1 year and be done. Biennials, the first year, they're going
I
to
don't know where
germinate
everybody
from
is.
seed, go through their vegetative growth.
Where's everybody?
Next year, they're gonna focus on flowering and actually producing seed, and that's
Mhm.
what we really have to worry about. And then perennials. Now perennials are, a lot of them are gonna have your rhizomes and
Go out
tubers.
and wait for them.
And also another thing to think about is they're gonna live past 2 years. They're gonna keep going, but they're gonna reproduce every year. Every year that after they get to their flowering stage, they're reproducing more. Now we're gonna get into a little practice with weed ID. And before we move on, I'm just gonna go ahead and get the little live portion out of the way. Anyone tell me what this weed on the left is? I'm sure someone here knows. This pokeweed, yes. And then this one's a little harder to see. But if you notice, it has a bunch of black seeds running up and down it. So it is a grass. But if you want to know what type of grass? Okay, this is Dallas grass. It's very easily identified by the black seeds that run up. This one, I'm sure quite a few of y'all have in y'all's yard. Anyone tell me what it is? Broadleaf plantain. It's a little hard to see. It was on the edge of my driveway, been ran over a couple times, so I had to grab it and go. Now, of course, here, this one's a little bit more tricky. Even me and Carla had to look this one up to make sure.
Go outside?
It's actually crown beard. It might be. I'm not 100%. Yeah.
Red?
Yeah.
That's a girl.
Now, like I said, a weed can be anything growing anywhere. This was on my fence row saying I didn't want it there. So it's a weed in my. Then we have burnweed here. Just a little identification of it. And this one, burnweed. Burnweed. And then this one right here is the big one. Anyone tell me what that is? Ragweed, yep. That's the one that's going to be giving y'all a bad allergy this time of year. Yeah,
Down the stairs?
best thing to do with.
Okay, let's go down the stairs. Okay.
Burnweed. Oh, the white flower, the crown beard. I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, it's a pollinator. Yeah. So see, some would consider it a weed, some wouldn't. It was in my fence row, so in my eyes, it's a weed. Plant out of place, exactly. All right, so this is a few annual weeds. Top left here, we have clover, yes. Right here, dandelion. Now, I didn't make this presentation, but someone else made it. Dandelions are actually perennials, so don't let that confuse you. All right, and over here, purple deadnet, yes. Moving to the bottom right. I heard it, the henbit, yep. Which can also be a biennial. Don't know how that works, honestly, but they have that presentation later, so apparently it can be biennial as well. And then right here, You'll see, I see this a lot around, yep, chickweed. I see it a lot around in the, yeah, it'll grow commonly in yards. Mhm. And then right here, no, it's not actually. I know whenever I first looked, that's the reason I grabbed it, because I thought so at first, but it is different. As you can see, these are the seed pods on it. They're heart shaped, and this one is actually called shepherd's purse. I was trying to think of the name, but as you can see over here, a lot of people, whenever it's not in this stage, will confuse it for dandelion because they look just about the same. All right, moving on to some perennial weeds here. Got, it's actually ground ivy, also known as creeping Charlie. And then this one right here, this is Virginia buttonweed. See, the picture really does look like Star of Bethlehem, but this is Virginia button. And the big difference is this is going to be found in like wet, compact soil areas. Over here, wild violet. Yep. Then, yep, had an example of that. Then right here we have curly dot. And the last one is known as, did someone say smartweed? Smartweed, yep. It's also commonly referred to as knotweed. Smartweed, knotweed. That's also going to be found in very moist, wet growing areas. All right, a few grasses here. Now these are going to be a little harder to identify by the picture. I'm not going to lie. Anyone got this one up here? It's hard to see. This is annual bluegrass. Once again, great forage for out in the field. Farmers don't really look at it as a weed, but in a yard, of course, it can be looked at as a weed. It's a very prolific seeder. So if you have it one year, next year you're going to have the same problem again if you like to see. And this is what I had up here, the Dallas grass. As you can see, them black seeds are what really give it away. Then right down here, someone crabgrass. Yep.
There's your
I'd
daddy and
say anyone
daddy.
who's tried to take weeds out of their yard knows what crabgrass is. And then right here we have goosegrass. Goosegrass.
Okay.
This one is actually a very difficult weed to take care of. Roundup typically doesn't touch it.
Come on back here.
You're gonna have to actually dig it
Mr.
up.
People. Dog.
All right. Oh, yeah. Is there any chance that y'all could mute y'all? Maybe. Mm-hmm.
They're gonna come.
So that's actually going to just be your regular annual hydro. Not necessarily perennial. There is a perennial and an annual, but the reason it's so hard to get it out of a wheat field is because wheat is a grass and trying to get a grass out of the grass.
Come on.
That's when we have problems fighting weed.
I'll go over it.
Now they do have a few different little.
They'll be here in a minute.
All right, so top left right here, these are on the sedges. This is just regular yellow nut sedge. Might see it often. If y'all ever do see it, pick it up, do what I talked about, roll it in your palm, and you notice it has a triangular stem. This one is a little bit less prevalent around our area. This is more West Tennessee. It doesn't really like the cold tolerant. Like we get the frost earlier than West Tennessee and all that. So this one's found more in West Tennessee, but this is purple nut sedge. And then down here in the bottom, this is the last sedge that we have for you, and it's Killinga. And now the way to tell between it and the Yellow nut sedge is the bloom on the head. As you can see, these almost look like little puffballs instead. And they will bloom continuously throughout the warm months. Mhm. It kind of depends. I mean, some weeds are not very tolerant of that. If you do that with Bermuda grass, it's going to root on and grow right back up. Put them in a plastic bag and throw more. Now, some of them are okay to compost as long as they haven't formed seed yet, as long as their root system isn't like rhizomes, or they produce by rhizome. Nope. Probably messing me up. You can't eat the leaf off pokeweed, can't you? Just don't eat the berries. Stay away from the berries. On pokeweed. Yeah, and it's young weed. I'm not going to recommend to eat anything because I don't want someone coming back saying I poisoned them. So that's just me. So this right here is just a little slide of, if you're at your house and you find a weed, you don't know what it is, this is good. These are good resources that you can actually look up. They can kind of help you identify what it is. I really recommend this mobile weed manual. When I'm out in the field, this is what I've always got pulled up when people are asking me to identify weeds for.
Is that an app?
That is an app. That's an app through University of Tennessee.
Which one? The second one?
Yeah, the mobile weed manual. If you do search UTK mobile weed manual, it should pop up in Google Play Store or the whatever iPhone uses. But that is definitely the one I recommend. I'm always using it. Right. So now let's just go through the life cycle. So if we understand the life cycle of a weed, we can count out a bunch of what we aren't dealing with. So an annual, we're going to have our germination. It's going to come down to our growth, into flowering and pollination. What we're trying to prevent is it getting to the point of seed set. If it gets a seed set, we're going to be having the problem next year that much worse. This can start becoming a nightmare year after year when you're getting one plant that's producing about 50,000 seeds. Annuals are typically going to have a shallow tap root. They don't have to have a really vigorous root set that stores nutrients for them because they're going to die. And pretty much always reproduce by seed and don't need food reserves, like I said. All right, so like I said, annuals complete their life cycle in 1 year or less. So summer annuals are always going to germinate in the spring, grow during summer, mature and die in the fall. And then winter annuals are going to germinate in fall, sometimes in the winter, mature and die in the spring or early summer. And it's very important to know this because if you call us and you ask, what weed do I have? First question I'm going to ask you, what stage of growth is it in right now? What is it doing? That's going to automatically 50-50 for me. It's one or the other. So knowing the life cycle of a weed is how we first identify the problems that we're having. Okay, so here we have a winter annual weed called hairy bittercress. It's got a narrow seed capsule. It's often found in ornamental beds or near ornamental beds, vegetable gardens, and paved areas. Most noticeable in early spring when it's actually flowering. Currently, it germinates in October because it is a winter annual and will flower sometime in February, March, depending on how our season's. All right, common chickweed. Now this one I imagine everyone has in their yard, has had in their yard at some point. This is a very common weed all around field edges, yards, gardens, just pretty much anywhere. So winter annual, its branches are gonna run along the ground and go erect at the end. Now when it flowers, the flowers can be light blue or white. Typically, most that I see around here are white. It's got a shallow, fibrous root system, easily removed, and the leaves of this one are edible. Now, I want to say, on last two, have you noticed that we had a kind of shallow, easily removed root system? Annuals are not going. Annuals typically don't have a very prolific root system. This one plant can produce about 25,000 seeds. On average, they produce around 25,000 seeds a year. Now, not all of those seeds are going to be viable and make it to germination. But even if 10% of them are, and that multiplies next year's growing pattern, and that multiplies again, you see where our problems come in. All right, henbit. This is another one that a lot of people have around their house, around the edges of fields and roadways. Square stems, pink purple flowers. How are you going to identify it? It says they can reach 16 inches in height. I don't think I've ever seen one get 16 inches tall personally. That's probably because I try to keep them mowed down when I can. Henbit. I'm sorry, if you can't see, I can set it right here. They will, yeah. And like I said, what I've seen is typically in the yard or the edge of fieldway or the edge of field. And when it was in the edge of field, I was spraying and killing it. So that's part of being a grown. But it is in the mint family. Tastes kind of like raw kale. Stems, flower, and leaves are edible, so you can eat this whole plant. And it can only be spread by seed. This is just a little bit better picture of what a mature common chickweed would look like. See, like the base of the plant should be right here, and it's kind of sprouted and went out from there. And that's the flower we're looking for at the top of another chickweed. It's going to look like a little daisy flower. All right, now annual bluegrass. These thrive in compacted soil. So if you haven't aerated your yard or haven't done something to help loosen up your dirt, bluegrass is going to try to start sapping itself if the seed is present. It could, yes, very much so. It's a prolific seed producer, so like I said, it's going to produce a lot of seed. It doesn't have to get tall and very mature to do so. It thrives on getting to the seed. Typically going to die off late in April, May, depending on our season. This year we saw it closer to the end of May, still trying to get going because we didn't really have that hot of a May. So, and it'll germinate in the late summer and early fall. Now, another thing about this is, like I said, farmers use this as a forage for winter for their cattle to have something to eat on so they don't have to feed so much hay. And it's also used in some athletic fields for like turf because of does so well in compact soil. Now, it's only certain varieties of it. Of course, it's not just going to be, your average variety growing out here in your flower bed. Keep in mind, weeds is person's perception. Here we have purslane. It's a summer annual, low growing plant, single tap root. It's small succulent. The leaves are edible. And now this is what I really wanted to say about this. Very small flowers, goes to seed 3 weeks after seedlings appear. So after you first seed, in 3 weeks, it's made seeds. So that's how quick these can reproduce. And our whole objective in annuals is to try to make sure that we take care of them before they go to seed. If we don't, then you might as well not even pull them. And it can reproduce by seed or stems. And the seeds can stay viable in the soil for 40 years. So 40 years from now, that one plant could still be producing another plant. These grow in almost any soil, but it thrives in sunlight and heat. Prefers wet weather, but can be drought tolerant. And actually, the leaves of it have a very high level of omega-3 fatty acids. So actually has pretty good health. This is kind of the bane of my existence right here whenever I forget to go. Palmer amaranth is a summer annual. And what's really bad about them is how quickly they can grow vertically. They can outcompete just about any plant that you put. And they can look a little purplish on the leaves. As you can see right there, they kind of got a little stem that can start to turn purple. And this is also kind of where we get the name red root pigweed. These are also kind of commonly known as pigweed sometimes. The young leaves of these are edible. But can anyone guess how many seeds one of these can possibly make in a year? 250,000.
Too many.
From a very big mature one, they can make up to 250,000 seeds. No, and I wanted to say another problem with these is these become they adapt very quickly and become resistant to chemical very quickly. Roundup's not going to touch these anymore. We've actually seen in Montgomery County where dicamba. So
How about the commercial vinegar?
commercial vinegar,
Yeah. 40%.
I'll be honest, it's probably going to act like it. Now this all depends on the ones that you see and what they've kind of. So the ones that are resistant to Roundup came from seed that was resistant to Roundup, and it's going to keep those are going to keep producing like that. Vinegar, I'm not really sure. When they didn't go up, they didn't really want to use the vinegar. So I can't say that I had much experience with it, but if you can catch them at about 2 to 4 inches tall, which is it only takes them about a day and a half to get past that, they're a lot easier to kill. Once they get up to this size, you might as well be trying to. Morning glories. I don't typically see these as a weed. Actually, I grow a couple of these in my front porch things every year. Have a beautiful bloom, but they can be very problematic for farmers. If you're trying to grow sweet corn in your garden, these will get on the edge of your fields and they will use them to climb up and eventually strangle out your corn. Can climb up to 10 foot tall, has a small tap root, but they're very easily eradicated as long as they're at this stage. Super easy to pull out of the ground and just toss. But now they do spread by seed once the flower pod is dried, pop off the vine. And I'm not exactly sure how many seeds these make a year, but I know it's more than a couple. So. All right, now this is a bad one, ragweed. We have this all over. I'm sure y'all seen it along fence rows, roadways, wood lines, in the middle of fields. It is a summer annual, has an upright growth pattern, get up to about 4 foot tall, as you can see with the example I brought. Understand that was cut off, not pulled up, so there was more to this plant. Multiple flower sets can release a bunch of seed of this, and they can be viable for 39 plus years. So, like I said, a weed today, a seed from this today can be viable, 2063. So, but they do have a shallow fibrous root system, which makes it pretty easy to get them removed. Mhm. Right. That kind of leads me to the point right above that. Remove when small.
Somehow
There's a reason. There's a reason these got cut and didn't get pulled up, I'll say.
but will it be
If you don't remove all the roots, yes, it can. Now, it is an annual, so if you do it late enough in the season, it's probably not going to. But if you get all the roots, it's fine. But with as big of it as it's got, from what you're explaining to me, it's probably already went to seed, and I'd be watching very closely next year to make sure you're not going to have the same problems next year. If you do get them when they're young before they produce the seed.
Oh, okay. That's the base of Roundup.
So that's not how Roundup works. We're going to get into chemicals eventually, but Roundup works by the plant being in an actively growing stage. So if you got something as big as this pokeweed right here, that's already matured and it's going to the flowering stage, Roundup's not gonna work nearly as effectively as something that's trying to grow. It also needs to have some kind of leaf on it. Roundup's not gonna get on the stem and soak in that way. It's gotta get on a leaf to get within the plant.
But if it's got it in the back,
Roundup typically doesn't kill the roots of the plant. Does not. From what I've seen, it'll burn the tops, it'll burn amaranth and stuff like that, and then it's gonna sprout back up from the same base.
according to the ads around there, still the roots and all, but
I don't know how much I trust that. That's personally. Now some grasses and stuff it might, but Roundup doesn't work as well on like stuff that's kind of got a woodier stem. So, for instance, Beach Haven, when we worked there to keep our roads clean, we sprayed Roundup at the bases of all the grapevines because it's a woodier plant. It doesn't soak in, it doesn't hurt the grapevine, but it does kill all the grass. As to spray, I'm not saying Roundup's bad to spray. We'll kind of get into that now. Roundup is non-selective. There, we do have some selective options that we can use that work a little bit better. And the problem with Roundup, 10 to 15 years ago, Roundup killed everything. Then people started using Roundup at diluted rates, different rates, not how it was intended to be used, and stuff became a lot more resistant to it. So now that's what we're kind of seeing. All right, so moving on to yellow nut sedge. It's actually a perennial weed. Like I said, flowers on triangular stalks. You'll be able to roll that in your hand and tell. And reproduces by seed and nodules on the roots. So if you go to remove yellow nut sedge and you know it's yellow nut sedge, do not shake the plant. If you do, you're basically going to be causing a bunch of more yellow nut sedge to fall down and reroot. Crabgrass, just go. There's two main kinds that we deal with down here: southern crabgrass, smooth crabgrass. This one, whenever you feel the leaf blade, it's going to feel kind of hairy and feel almost a little prickly. This one, it just feels like a smooth leaf, and that's the biggest, easiest way to tell between the two. And note that even though this is a weed in your yard, in Cheatham County, we actually have a crabgrass test plot in a field for a farmer. And during the last year when the drought was so bad, it actually sufficed his cows through the drought. He didn't have to feed hay. So this is a very tolerant grass. It makes a great forage. All right, prostrate spurge. Now this is going to be more of a ground creeping kind of plant. And the milky sap, when it breaks open, now this can cause blisters on your skin, irritate your eyes. So just try to kind of avoid that. It's commonly found on dry, bare sites. They prefer sandy and gravelly soils, actually. So, and yeah, but eventually these will turn upward, and that's when they're going to start trying to reap very ends of. All right, so weed classification biennials live for more than 1 year, one growing season, but never over 2 years. In the first year, they're going to have their vegetative growth, and that's going to kind of what sets up the stage for year two when they're going to flower and actually try to produce. So we get them in that first year, chances are next year we're going to have a lot less of a problem. I'm not saying no problem, but a lot less of a problem than what we could have had. So examples of this is Queen Anne's lace, wild carrot, also known as wild carrot. It's a biennial weed, and during its first year of growth, it actually very much so resembles wild carrot growing in your garden. Second year, you're going to start getting these white flowers. That's when the seeds are going to start producing. And it's got a slightly thickened taproot. These are going to be commonly found in fence rows, pastures, roadsides. Prefer some well-drained soil. And invades, disturbs sites. So basically, if you've worked some ground or done something with some ground, this is going to try to move in pretty quick because it can quickly take hold and outcompete what else is around. All right, so for perennials live for more than 2 years, and we have two different kinds. We have simple and creeping. Simple is going to spread by seed. That's going to be your dandelion, your plantain. I don't know if y'all can see it on this one, but if you look, it's got little flowers that are coming off, and that's the seed that it's producing. So simple is always going to reproduce by seed. Now creeping, this is going to be like your Bermuda grass and stuff like that, because it's going to actually reproduce with rhizomes, which are below ground stems, and stolons, which are above ground stems. All right, a couple of characteristics of perennial weed types. They have a very deep root system. This is because whenever they go dormant, they have to have a food reserve to help through that dormancy. So their root system is going to be much more vigorous. No, they don't all have tap roots. So, like Bermuda grass is not going to have a tap root, but it has such a root system that it almost creates an impenetrable mat in your yard. They primarily reproduce by rhizomes and stolons. And like I said, they need that food reserve to sustain the plant through its dormancy period. Okay, so kind of like the life cycle. Like I said, if we understand the life cycle, we know what we're dealing with. We go from germination or sprouting to the growth with the rhizome, stolon, or tuber. This is when it's going to have its lowest amount of stored carbohydrates. Right here is when it's actually trying to use its vegetative growth. And we move on to flowering and pollination. And then we get to the seed set or vegetative structure maturation. So that would be when the stolons and rhizomes and all that is actually really getting mature. And then it's going to go to store its carbohydrates to go dormant. And actually, believe it or not, whenever it's trying to store those carbohydrates is when stuff like Roundup will also work pretty well, because it's trying to suck all that stuff in, and Roundup can actually work pretty well then as well. So that leads me to Bermuda grass. Now, Bermuda grass, I actually prefer Bermuda grass yard. It's a perennial grass, propagates nodes through the flowers. Now, the thing about this is, if you have a fescue yard and you're trying to maintain a fescue yard, this is almost impossible to get rid of. You're going to have to literally dig it up, and dig it up when you only see a little patch of it, because any more than that, and you're going to have your hands full. Once it does establish, it will take over your yard completely. So it gets so thick that it makes it almost impossible for the weeds to pop up. And honestly, in my opinion, it's a very pretty grass. I'm a golfer, and everywhere that I go, there's Bermuda grass on the golf course. So it is, because of how thick it is. Better for erosion because of how thick the roots get in the soil. But now, like it says, if you do get rid of this, do not toss it in the compost pile, because what you're going to do is you're going to have Bermuda grass instead of a compost pile. It's going to take over, and it's going to come back and get back into the yard again. Just always bag it and throw it in the trash. All right, next we have ground ivy as a perennial weed, also known as creeping Charlie. It actually has a mint-like odor whenever it is crushed. Produces by rhizomes, and this is actually very easily to eradicate by pulling. It doesn't have nearly as vigorous of a rooting system as Bermuda grass does. It's going to prefer shaded areas of your yard with very little competition. So, like if you have a bare spot in your yard, this is where you see it trying to come over and take over. All right, then we have bulbous buttercup. there's actually quite a few different kinds of buttercups. That's a big problem. Wild buttercup in middle of pastures and hay fields has always been a problem. So this one can get 8 to 24 inches in height. Of course, one of the main signs that you have buttercup is the yellow flower at the top, and reproduces by seed and dividing of the corn. So this is one perennial that does reproduce by seed. It actually becomes established where fresh soil is exposed and prefers nutrient poor, well-drained soils. So it doesn't have to have a lot of nutrients to establish. It actually prefers it not to have a lot of nutrients. See a lot of this commonly in yards and in hay fields and pastures. All right. Next we have dandelion. I'm sure everyone here has had a dandelion in their yard at some point in time. That yellow flower is eventually going to come out to a puffball head. Interesting fact, I didn't know this until I started kind of researching on them. That seed can travel up to 5 miles away. So you get the right wind gust, and your neighbor across the river might have dandelions in their yard. That's the reason we want to try to eradicate early before the seed head. Like I said, if we can take care of the problem before the seed, then we can have a lot less of a problem next year. Plantain, this is also another common one you're going to see in your yard. They do just fine in compacted soils. Like I said, mine was right on the edge of my driveway. My wife's probably drove over 100 times at this point. So, they're low growing, but can spread quickly because of the amount of seed they produce. This little plant right here can produce up to 14,000 seeds a year. So, and what was that?
Keep them both, but come back.
So they will keep trying to grow and produce that seed. And what we don't want is it to have mature seeds. So if you looked at this one closely, you can tell that the seed head hasn't matured yet. So those aren't viable seeds yet. We just don't want that mature set. Now, one of the best control of broadleaf weeds and grass is mowing low because they're not very tall. So these can be mowed. Now they are a little lower. It's kind of harder to get them, but you can, once that seed head starts coming up, you'll be able to get it just about every time, and that's what you're trying to prevent. And I will say they are pretty difficult to. I tried to pull this one out. They can be pretty difficult to hand remove. But these are mainly noticed by the very rounded shape and how it grows low. All right, so next pokeweed. I'm sure everyone has seen this at some point. These can get up to 10 foot tall, and they're primarily going to be found where birds roost because birds are going to eat the seed, roost, and going to pass through the bird right to where it is. That's the reason you're going to see a lot of these on fence rows, wood lines, and areas such as that. You can find them in the middle of the field still. That give away that you're looking at pokeweed is, of course, the red, brown, the reddish purple kind of stem color with the black berries. Stay away from the berries. They are poisonous. Hand pull them while they're young because that taproot can get up to 6 inches in diameter, and that would take a pretty strong person to pull up. All right. Anyone tell me what we're looking at right there? Yellow nutsedge. Good deal. So these are the nodules we were talking about reproducing by. That's the reason we don't shake them once before. So it has these all over the roots, and if you do, you're never going to eradicate the problem if you try to shake that soil. All right. So the problem with nutsedge is they're tolerant of low mowing like grasses. They're rhizotomous and reproduces primarily by tubers. And like we said, they are perennial. So if they're there that year, they're going to be there that next year, the year after, the year after. Mm-hmm.
So, do you have herbicides still there?
There is something called sedge hammer. I can't speak for its effectiveness. Roundup doesn't touch this. Of course, Roundup will kill your grasses around it, but when this was out in the middle of someone's field, they let it go because of how much it would cost to control this weed. They can't. They're very chemically resistant. Honestly. They're one of the harder ones to kill. White clover. Now, white clover has its benefits, but it also has a bunch of disabilities. It will eventually take over your yard. It spreads quickly and spreads very, very fast. Now, of course, eventually you'll see a little white flower pop up out of here, and there's different kinds of clover. There's red clover and there's crimson clover. But difficult to fully eradicate doesn't even begin to explain how hard it is to kill clover. The chemicals that we have that don't kill grasses and kill broadleaves like this won't touch clover hardly. So just keep that in mind. If you start seeing some in your yard, you probably want to try to get it before it goes to the seed head and go ahead and take it out. You want to get it by the root and remove it as soon as possible. All right. Time does anyone got? 7? Yeah, we can go ahead and take a little break. I'm about halfway through. So. We'll take a little break and be back in about 5-10 minutes.
White clover still
I can do pictures? Yeah. No, that's actually one of the good things about it. It's not about the yard once it gets out. It's the thing. The thing you don't like about it, you're gonna mow May to about August, and you're not gonna mow it more. That's huge. You're gonna kind of have to mow all season long. Yeah, we didn't mow. Yeah, I mean, you're not really ever gonna mow during the winter, but you're gonna be mowing with this. You're gonna be mowing late in the fall, early in the spring, and then still get good enough rain in the summer. Like I said, I like it. It's all people. No, it's not. It's kind of like the spring, and it's not really growing. But and like once it goes back, I have so it's like irrigation. You're not gonna have to do that like you are with this. No, cheaper. Let's do that. Oh yeah. This non-watery. There's already irrigation. And see the thing is, if you was gonna try to take care of it, you're gonna have to dig up that whole portion of your yard, get rid of it, or you're gonna have to kill it off with chemicals, Roundup. Problem is, then it's still gonna come back. Your goal there is try to get your rescue out. I just don't flip back to something. You have to really kill it. Roundup. Back. You got to spray the Bermuda with it, or it's gonna go. You gotta spray your Bermuda. Then what you have to do is come back and kind of lightly work the ground, feed heavily rescue for that like fall growing season. Yeah. And then you hope that it gets that growing season and your next growing season. Come back there. At least help. You might start to fix it. That's the reason people see it. How hard to eradicate. this time,
I wouldn't say next year we got a yard.
yeah,
With it,
about,
it's
about 1, 2 seasons ago, I have a good day. Yeah, you ain't gonna have to worry about fescue or anything.
I don't know if I did. I'm putting in a putting too. So
And
if
that,
I grew the Bermuda, I could just chip off of it.
he's not, but no, that's a lot of places, like, we, we is already in flow. It's not gonna get. That's one of, never, it doesn't get tall like that. It reproduces different ways, try to get tall, makes it seem.
Yeah.
So you're gonna be mowing a lot less. I mean, there's a lot of benefits. Now, don't get me wrong, my yard, I haven't made it. I would love to, but I've got about. Well, I would love to.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. My Amaranth. As they are. But see now, and there are some ones that aren't problems. Oh, that one's problem. It's
Well,
not great.
Right.
So I keep it.
But we have a pie. About 100 bucks.
The shamrocks, the clover, that's the ones that you should. The ones that are very hard to pick it up on. Because I love.
Right.
Like, so much.
That all goes back to everyone's perception of a weed is different. Anything can be a weed, anything doesn't. That's just really what the weed goes.
Yeah, not basic. Other.
See, every year they've been different. and me and my dad go. My farm, we have 2 feet, do this bunch every year, and they've actually been growing twice early. Like beginning of March, kids, you gotta wait till like beginning of April.
So then I,
The number one.
so fast.
My dad sees always. Yeah. Oh. I don't think that's cedar needles that fall every year make it very easy to see them versus in other areas where you can walk right over them.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we found, Noah found one back there in the creek, but
If you found one, it's bound to be more stuff.
well, there wasn't any.
Right. But whatever time, I
Must be
think like
Fairly small, maybe.
well, it was really on. Kind of profit. Now, it all depends on where your sunrise sets. Anything that's getting like all day sun have anything. That's ground temperature.
April.
Yes, you'd have a much bigger growing. Canada.
try to. Like,
Other gloves is the way to go with that. So for this next section, we're going to be going through weed seeds and how they spread. So here on the left, we have a lamb's quarter, and now a big lamb's quarter can produce up to 100,000 seeds in a year. And some studies reveal that they've actually produced over 500,000 in a year. So this is the reason we try not to let them go to the seed stage, because it's a lot harder to fight them off next year. And of course, on the right here, we have a red root pigweed that can produce up to 250,000 seeds. So. Seeds of most weeds are tiny. The plant has limited resources to put into the seeds, so they make them tiny and make a lot instead of trying to go for a quality. Disturbed environments are where we're really going to start seeing weed seeds germinate. That's one of their cues. It's a disturbed environment that doesn't have anything growing right now. That's when it knows I need to germinate and try to get going. They kind of offset the seed spread risk over many offsprings. That's the reason we're seeing these produce 100 to 250,000 seeds. So what we need to focus on is the germination cues. The seedlings of these can compete poorly with established plants. So if we've got a thick lawn around it, it's going to be a lot harder for a little seedling to grow and actually mature into a viable plant. So basically one of their germination cues is the absence of other plants around it. So if you've just tilled up your garden spot, well, them weed seeds are knowing, hey, I'm fixing to have to get going here. Near surface conditions, you're also bringing up a new seed bed to the top of that dirt, which is causing you to have more. You might have weeds you haven't seen there ever before. So, and any soil disturbances, like I said, with tilling. So, what is a soil seed bank? A seed bank is basically just the natural storage of seeds underneath the soil that's there. So, it's when you're bringing about a foot to 2 foot worth of dirt up to the surface that hasn't been there in a while. That's allowing new weed seeds to come up, and those are the ones that are going to start germinating. Not all these seeds are going to survive in there. So after the first year, the rate will start rapidly declining on what seeds are surviving. But after that year, they definitely still can survive. So this is just a little graph here showing that most seeds come from a few large plants. So right here, you got about 60 red root pigweeds. They're producing somewhere between about 40,000 seeds a plant. So there's a lot of them around there. They're competing for each other. They're not going to have as much nutrients. Now you have like one plant in the middle of a field, and now you're down here to that 240, 280,000 seed per plant range. So that's when you're getting into trouble. Don't get me wrong. Either way you do the math, it's not good. It's just, that's the truth behind it. So how do these weed seeds get from one place to another? Well, us mainly. Velvet leaf is a bad one in the middle of pastures. It gets dispersed through feed grains. Your animal eats it. Then basically in the manure of the animal, next thing you know, you're going to have velvet leaf in the middle of your pasture. Tractor tires and tillage machineries. I've seen people not combine acres worth of soybeans because sickle pod was in the middle of the field, and they wasn't going to put that in their combine and spread it next field because it's going to be that much of a problem next year. So, and combines is a big one. So, I'd say if you have a area of garden that you're fixing to work up and you know it's got a weed problem, work your other areas up first, then move to that one. And after you've done that, go ahead and clean your tiller or whatever you're using to work up the ground. Velvet leaf. Now this is a pretty rough one. They are a stationary perennial that reproduces by seed. We got their name actually by the leaf having a velvety touch when you fill it. Grows a bunch of small hairs. But they are actually very competitive in soybean and corn fields. And plants can produce anywhere from 700 to 17,000 viable seeds a year. And in 1 year, they can cost hundreds of millions of dollars to farmers' bottom line in trying with like control measures and the reduced yields. All right, like I said, stationary perennials, biggest problem is going to be in hay fields, pastures. They're usually not very competitive in the first year. It's after that we have to worry about them. Easily eliminated by tillage. Unfortunately, with tillage, you're also going to start causing new weed problems. So that's something to think about. And always, they typically are established from seed. And then you have wandering perennials. Now, this is going to be like your Bermuda grass. This is stuff that is rooting underground and causing new plants to form that way. These are the ones that can get bad quickly because of how vigorous their rooting system is. They can take over very, very quickly. Just a few key points. Breaking up perennials does promote sprouting. Tillage and surface conditions and absence of plants stimulates germination. It's always going to. That's what we have to watch out for. So tilling your garden, try to only till where you're going to actually be planting. Don't try to till a whole acre if you're only going to be planting rows every 36 inches. Now, and just remember, species have characteristic seasons. These seasons are what helps us break down and eliminate half of what we're looking at. So if it's growing vigorously in the summer, well, I can take chickweed and henbit out because it's a winter annual. Seeds often persist in the soil for many years. Like it says, 4 decades for lamb quarters. So 40 years from now, a lamb's quarter seed could still be viable if the ground's working. Like I made sure to mention in the presentation, one plant can produce a lot of seeds. So we try to keep them from going to seed. That's the main thing I want y'all to take away from this presentation. If it doesn't go to seed, it can't reproduce. We're doing much better on our weed control for the next year. It takes a couple of years for this method to really start helping and have an effect, but after 3 or 4 years, you're really going to notice a difference. Now, the seed size does help control so if you have a bigger seed, it's going to be able to germinate from a lower point in the seed bed, whereas some have to be near the soil surface. Some can be at a couple inches down and still be able to germinate if it's a bigger seed. And this one is very, very viable. Say your neighbor asks you to come and work his little garden spot up for him with your tractor and disc. Well, now you're probably going to be bringing some new weed species into your garden. Make sure you clean it before you work your land. Spray it off real good because that's how we're going to spread these weeds into our gardens. So undisturbed weed seeds tend to persist longer than seeds subject to periodic tillage. Seeds deep in the soil are stored below the germination zone. That's kind of what I was saying. So if you're 1/2 foot to 2 foot under, that's whenever you start tilling and stuff, you're working those up to the top, and that's when they're cued to germinate. Grass seeds tend to be less persistent than broadleaf weed seeds. Those that get turned out, those that get turned under, those aren't going to last as long. They're not as viable. And the number of surviving seeds of most weed species declines rapidly after the first year. So that first year, a lot of them are going to survive and still be viable that next year. And after that, it starts rapidly declining. And moving on to some weed management tactics. Okay, so this is what I've been preaching. Identify the problem. If we know what weed we have, we know how we can control it. It's always good to keep a little diagnostic toolkit if you're out working in the garden trying to figure out what you got. Little microscope, not microscope, but like a magnifying glass. Knowing the life cycle of the pest. That's the biggest one in my key. If it's not that time of the year for that certain weed to be growing, it's probably not that one. Is the weed the cause or the effect of the problem? So, is it the effect of you tilling up your garden? Is that the reason that weed came up? Know why it came up in the first. Try to find out why it came up in the first place, and then confirm your diagnosis. I'm not the best with the weed identification. I still have to do some looking at myself. But if y'all have any questions, always don't be afraid to reach out to us. Me or Carl will try to help you as much as we can, and see what you got going on. So when it comes to controlling weeds, we really are looking at a buffet approach. I go to a buffet, I'm not just going to get mashed potatoes each time I go up. You really want, there's various methods, and we want to try to kind of incorporate a couple of various methods at one time. And it might take several times to do that. I know if I go to a buffet, I ain't getting one plate. I paid for more than that, right? So when it comes to managing weeds, the things we need to think about is maintaining a healthy garden. Less weeds means less pests, means less chance you're going to have insects and disease on your actual garden or ornamentals for that matter. Number two, what I've been preaching this whole time, prevent seed production. Please, if y'all don't take anything else from this PowerPoint, I'll take that out. Then, if you can't prevent seed production, next step is prevent seed germination. So next year, if you're going to have a problem, let's lay something down to help prevent seeds from actually germinating, whether that be a mulch, a plastic, something. Eliminate the weeds when they're in the seedling stage. That's going to be the easiest time to kill them, whether it be chemically, whether it be pulling them up. Either way, they haven't got to seed, and it's going to be the easiest time and the best control we have. And always, if you're going to go with a chemical control, always target the susceptible growth stages. If this plant is matured and it's in the flowering stage, our Roundup, 2,4-D, whatever you might be using, isn't going to be nearly as effective. That's kind of what this graph shows right here. See, it's seedling, we have almost 100% control. Moved over to vegetative, well, it's in good growing conditions, so we still have pretty good control at 75%. Now you're down to flowering. Now, well, you spray them, you're going to kill about 50% of them. Then you get over to mature, and you're going down even less than that, probably a little bit more than a quarter, but still. I'm not saying Roundup won't work at that stage. I'm just saying that it's going to be less effective at that stage. Okay, so a couple of strategies. Like I said, identify the weed, life cycle, and habitat in which a weed likes to thrive in. So if you have a wet, poorly drained soil that's compact, well, now you're looking at a couple of different options like smart weed and whatnot. So if we know what it likes, we can kind of automatically take out some of what it could be. And then integrate control methods. So this goes between preventative probably being the best one, mechanical, such as mowing or hoeing, biological, cultural, and of course chemical. All right, cultural methods, sanitation. So when you go to the top store, not the top store, when you go to Lowe's and you see the topsoil there that's about $1 a bag, make sure it's weed-free seed and plant material. If you're bringing topsoil to your house that has weed seed in it, you're just creating the problem. Sometimes it's better to spend an extra $1 or $2 to make sure that topsoil is weed free.
How do you know the bag will stay?
The bag typically does say, if the, topsoil's been cleaned. Or sifted at least.
Manure's even worse.
Yep, Carla's got a story on that. Manure. Yeah, aminopyralids. But putting it on your yard. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, and manure can also cause you to have new weeds come up in your garden and yard. So, so just keep that in mind that if you're buying manure for somebody, always check, make sure they haven't used no aminopyralids. It will kill whatever you have in your garden. Those are commonly known as graze on necks. And there's a couple other big brand names, but the ones that are sold around here known as graze on. And also, like he said, you'll be able to tell what weeds they had in their pasture very, very shortly after. Always clean your equipment. Like I said, if you're going to help your neighbor out, make sure to clean your equipment afterwards because you don't know what they had in their seed bed, and that's on your equipment now. So clean your equipment. Just make sure you're not bringing any problems back into your garden. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, just spraying it off. Spraying it off will mostly take care of it. Now, don't get me wrong, you can't be 100% ever, but just taking the steps to try to prevent it is what we're trying to do here. Moving on, the field borders and property edges, keep those cleaned up because that's how birds are going to get there. They're going to move it around. Next thing you know, you have it in the middle of your field instead of just on the property edges. And I don't know if y'all have got this yet or not, but prevent from going to seed.
Been in there like 6 times.
I feed birds and I'm trying to get the mess free birds.
Mhm.
Does that have weeds?
It shouldn't.
I still have weeds on the bottom and like below it. So I'm like, what's coming from the seeds? The birds pooping?
It could be coming from the birds themselves from where they've been other places getting seed.
So if you buy bird seeds, try to get it, I think they call it mess free.
Yeah, probably. It might be called that, but most seed, the good thing about seed is it's easy to clean seed. We have a bunch of seed, we have one up right across the border into Kentucky that's a seed cleaner. So when they clean the seed, they typically weed out any unwanted seeds, I should say.
Go up there and buy birds.
Well, you can't go to him to buy bird seed, but I'm just saying like that they can clean birds, they can clean seed. So it's a lot less of a problem when you're buying seed. It's more or less the one thing that's hard is grass seeds. Grass seeds can get by in a cleaner really quick. In
Like
fact,
bird seed, like if I buy birds from Lowe's, I don't know where that, I think from Washington State. And
Right.
now I'm getting their weeds and I'm doing
right,
that I may not.
right. Now, typically, like I said, these companies like that, they're afraid of something like that coming out, and people don't want to buy their products. They try to take a better care of actually what gets through their seed.
There's no regulation on whether it's be certified that it's for the weed seed. There's nothing like that on your
Feed, I'm not like livestock feed. I'm not 100% sure about because that goes back to us talking about how velvet leaf spreads. Now, bird seed, I would assume that there's some kind of regulation on it, but I can't be 100%. Yeah, that's always the best.
That's why audio.
Oh, it's still seeds what they put in the bag so they won't. That's what it grow.
I just roll with the wind.
You. But I'm not thinking about feeding birds.
So some of our cultural methods are gonna include a stealth seed bed, row spacing, and cover crops. Stealth seed bed is basically weeds. You turn your soil, allow the weeds to germinate, then you kill them off. After that, you plant what you want, so that everything you're hoping that everything in that you've turned up to that new seed bed is done and over with. Now, the only problem with that is any disturbance to the soil after that is going to allow more weeds to come up. Very finicky game we're playing here, trying to control weeds on stuff. But any tillage that you use after that on a stealth seed bed, try to make it less than 2.5 inches. Hopefully, anything that's 2.5 inches and up has already been killed off. Row spacing, we can use this heavily to our advantage. If you have smaller crops, plant them closer together. That way, when they get up and grow, they're shading out what weed seeds are there. Remember, a weed germination cue is that there's nothing there to compete with it. So if we can plant them closer, we're gonna have less weed germination. Overall, a lot less elbow grease going into the garden, just trying to keep weeds out. And then cover crops. Cover crops can work really well. This is buckwheat we have in this picture right here. We actually use this out at our community garden. So if you're going to have a later planted crop, like a later planted tomato, you can use this in the beginning of the growing season, sometime early spring. Let it grow up. It's going to shade out the bed. Not as many weeds are going to germinate. When you get done, it has a very short growing season, dies off, plant your tomatoes right behind it. And that is one option that we do have. All right, mechanical methods are going to include stuff like tilling, hand removal, hoeing, mulches, and hoe. We're going to get into a little bit of each of these. So with tillage, it can control emerged weeds very well. Problem is you're bringing up new weeds. So it could also damage crop roots if you get too close to your crop. So the big thing to remember about this is you might be taking care of the weeds that are there, but you're bringing new weeds to the surface that might germinate.
So in that case, would it be helpful to spray, till, and then spray again?
Well, really, you want to till and spray what's going to come up after that, and that's going to go. That's kind of with our stealth seed bed. If you've already got stuff out there, depending on what you have, you might. I mean, spraying can kind of get a little dicey, getting too close to other plants with herbicide drip damage. So if you already have stuff in your garden, I almost wouldn't recommend spraying again, depending on what it is. We'll get into some of the options that we do have for spraying though. Hand pulling and hoeing, this is still used in high value crops such as tobacco. I remember when I was 16, I was out there chopping out tobacco rows just about every day. Not fun, but if you got a high value crop, of course, it's what you're gonna have to do. It's also much easier to control small weeds instead of letting them get above, 6 foot tall like we did. That made for some fun days. Mulches. So things to consider with mulches is what crop you're using and the application methods you're going to be doing. Materials like natural or organic, and the thickness that you need to suppress the weeds that you have. So different weeds need a different thickness so that they won't germinate. Organic mulches are going to be less effective at inhibiting the growth of certain plants because they're able to push through a lot easier. Now, inorganic mulches such as plastic films, woven fabrics, shredded rubber, and stuff like that is going to be more effective, but they come with their disadvantages. Like a plastic, you're going to have to irrigate because if you've got it all around it's not going to get enough rainfall. So you got to think about irrigation. Woven fabrics do somewhat work a little bit better, but they can still allow weeds to pop through, but don't have to worry about irrigations. So like I said, mulch is inorganic. You got black plastic mulch, warm soils in the spring, helps the warm soil in the spring, suppress the weeds. Clear plastic isn't as good because sunlight can still get through and the weeds will push out past the plastic. We really want to go with the black plastic, but I mean, it does help. You're going to have less weeds. You're just going to have something that didn't get through. Other colors are designed to transmit certain wavelengths, and then anything that's non-porous, like I said, you're gonna have to set up some kind of irrigation, whether you're going out there and hand watering each individual thing you got or what, but you're gonna have to set up something. So some of our natural options, it's gonna be straw, wood chips, pine straw. I haven't really seen sawdust used too much personally, but apparently it is. Newsprint and just anything that can effectively shade and help us not let the weed seed germinate. That is a very good point. Straw can have weed seed in it, so you gotta really kind of watch what you get when it goes down. Pine needles typically are a little bit better because around the base of a pine tree, you're not gonna have much growing. What we were worried about with straw is in a wheat field, a lot of these times, these farmers are gonna let some weeds get away from them, and that's where you're gonna get your weeds. Okay, so we also have the method of solarization. I've personally never done this. This is feasible in a small area. You get to a bigger area, it's gonna become more difficult. But the basic general idea of it is you want it to be heavy grade plastic, somewhere between 1.5 to 4 mils thick. You're gonna have to it's gonna require some fallow time. So really, I mean, you're taking 4 or 6 weeks out of your garden to do this method. It's only effective for about 2 to 3 inches deep because it's good. What our goal is to kill the weed seeds that are that deep, but you have to have 120 to 130-degree Fahrenheit temperatures to be able to kill those weeds. And plus, once you do it, you're not going to be able to till anymore. I mean, unless it's less than 2.5 inches. So, all right. So now mowing. This is another mechanical. Actually, my favorite because I get to ride on the lawn instead. It's more effective on broadleaf weeds and grasses, and it's also much more effective on annual than perennial. Perennial is going to have that resilience, keep trying to come back, whereas annual, if you mow it a couple times, it's not going to try to because it's already put too much into trying to grow. To see any effect on perennials, it's really going to take quite a few years. You eventually will, but it's just going to take longer. So just a couple little quick facts they wanted to add in. Breaking up perennials increases sprouts, but each sprout gets weaker as you break it up. Can use cultivation to flush weeds out of the soil, kind of like stealth seedbed that we talked about. And now, if seeds miss their annual opportunity, many may die before the next year. So that's something to kind of think about. But you also, with that same thing, have to think about erosion. So, like if I was to till up a garden in the fall so that I could plan to plant it for the next spring, well, now I'm going to have a lot of erosion, but it's going to help kill off a bunch of weeds. And I mean, at this point, we're kind of beating a dead horse here, but avoid seed production. And always try not to have new weeds come in. That goes back to sanitizing your equipment. If you help your friend or whatever, just make sure to always clean your equipment and try to avoid new weeds coming in. Okay, so here's some practices for organic weed control. As I've said before, always want to identify what we're working with. Make sure the soil is treatable, not wet, not dry. And this kind of comes back to only working your soil where you're going to be planting. So instead of working your whole garden up, work your row up instead. So that way you're not exposing nearly as many new weeds to that seed bed up top. And I mean, our best option for organic is manually pull up and dig up the seedling when it's small. Always attempt to get all the roots. Weeds are persistent. They're going to try to come back off what they can. Remove the plant before it flowers to prevent seed spread. Cover exposed soil with leaf mulch, plastic cover, wood chip, something to help to prevent seeds from germinating. And whatever material you're using, you might have to go a little bit thicker with, like leaves most weed seeds are gonna be able to push past just a few leaves. You might have to get a couple inches worth to actually help prevent germination. And you can spray full strength white vinegar. Problem is, it's going to kill the above ground portion. The roots are going to not die, and you're going to have to come back in a week or two. So always keep that in mind that if you're going to kill it, you need to get the roots. All right, on the chemical control. So a herbicide is a chemical that we use to control, suppress, or kill a weed by interrupting any kind of its plant growth process. Now, I know chemicals have had a bad rap coming around them, of course, Roundup, glyphosate, but when used correctly, they can be one of our best control methods. What we always have to remember is to follow the label and always wear your protective, personal protective equipment when spraying. That label is quite literally the law. Read it, understand it, and follow and abide by it. So before you use herbicides, you want to identify the desirable plants you want to keep. We don't want to kill the weed, but also kill what we're trying to keep. That's a big portion of that. Read and understand your herbicide label. I'm serious on that. You really need to make sure you know what you're working. Always follow the mixing, application, storage, and disposal directions carefully. I was actually working with a chemical about 2 years back. I mixed it wrong one time, and it basically formed cheese curds all over the top of the sprayer. Every other time I mixed it was fine because I didn't skip a certain step. That time I skipped it, and I had cheese curds in the sprayer. Only use the recommended amount. A lot of people think, well, it calls for 4 ounces. I'll put 8 in. I'll make it super hot. I'll kill it much quicker. These chemical companies have spent millions and millions of dollars figuring out what will work with what and why this should be on the label. I promise you, if they wanted to get you to spend more money, they would say use 8 ounces instead of 4. So only use the recommended amount. It's going to work. Always maintain your equipment. That's a big one. If you use a sprayer that year, don't sit it down with that chemical in it. It's going to wear down your rubber gaskets and everything like that. Next year, it could bust and spray all over you. Always make sure to clean that out and dispose of the chemicals properly. It all depends on what the label says is the proper disposal. I always try to only mix up what I'm going to need. And sometimes if like I'm just mixing up Roundup in a sprayer, I will pour it back into my Roundup container and just put pre-mixed on. So it's like ready to use at that. But it all depends on what the label says. And there actually is a company that you can call. I'm not sure their number. Do they still exist, Carla? Come material. Yeah, and they would. I know at co-op they would come collect ours because we were, of course, using. Oh, really?
Coming up, I think maybe.
Yeah. So there is a way to get rid of it if you mix up too much. And if the plant that you're trying to keep is not on the label, don't spray it because, like I said, these companies have spent millions and millions of dollars figuring out what it will and what it won't work on. If it's not on there, it's probably going to kill it. So what's going to identify what's going to help select herbicides? Help us select herbicides. First of all, got to identify what we're working with. And by that, I pretty much mean a broadleaf or a grass. I can use many different chemicals depending on what each is. So besides that, now, of course, like I said, palmers have grown a lot of resistance to Roundup and stuff like that. So that comes down to term tolerance of desirable plants and undesirable plants because we want to be out there actually doing something, not just out there spraying for no reason. And always wear your protective equipment. I'm going to preach that pretty much through this whole little section. So herbicide classifications, we have two different kinds. We have our contacts, we have our systemics. Our contacts basically are only going to affect the part of the plant that we spray. If you spray this leaf, it's not going to get down into the roots. If you spray this one leaf right here and nothing else, the rest of the plant's still going to be good and green tomorrow. That one leaf's going to die. That's how contact works. Now these are like diquat, paraquat, bromoxone. They're cell disruptors is what they are. So that's the reason they don't move through the plant. Also, most contacts are very dangerous. A lot of them come with skull and crossbones on them. Will burn your skin. One sip can kill. Some people might have heard that with paraquat, and it really can. So if you're ever using a contact, be very wary. Systemic is going to be like your Roundup. It's going to readily translocate through the plant tissue. And what Roundup does is basically, when it gets through the plant, it takes these little growing sections and it cuts them off, and nutrients can't get into that plant. So that's how Roundup's going to be. There we go. All right. So now we have pre-emergence and post-emergence. The goal of a pre-emergence is to put the pre-emergence herbicide down before anything germinates. This is used a lot in yards and lawns. We use it after our initial burn down in crop fields. But if we let the seed germinate, there's very few of these that have any reach back and will kill what you're trying to kill. That's not what these are made. Post-emergence, kind of like Roundup. This could be Roundup 2,4-D, dicamba, any of the above. If it's made to be sprayed on it after it's up and growing, it's post-emergence. But now it will not control weed seeds in the ground that haven't germinated yet. And this is where we get into kind of a tricky category. We got selective and non-selective. So selective categories. So you can kill a broadleaf with it, but it won't hurt a grass. You can kill a grass with it, but it won't hurt a broadleaf. The biggest example of this is 2,4-D. You spray this on pastures and fields because it's not going to affect your grass, but it is going to kill broadleaf plants. Now, on the flip side, clethodim will kill grasses, but won't hurt broadleaf. So if you've got a row of watermelons, clethodim will kill all the Johnson grass in it, but it's not going to touch the watermelon. Then you have your non-selectives. Non-selectives tend to be like your Roundup, Finale, and they're generally going to kill all plant species. But that's also the reason that all these plants are starting to get resistant to them, is because that's everyone's go-to. They don't ever switch it up. If we could switch it up from year to year, you're going to do a lot better in not having resistant weeds.
Is spring very specific on what it will kill, or not like what kill grass?
Yes, so that's what it's saying. So basically, all these right here are going to kill broadleaf. I don't know why they didn't throw clethodim in here to show you the opposite, where it'll kill grasses but not broadleaves. But all those are actually broadleaf weed killers. Annual weed grasses are best controlled using pre-emergence herbicides. But now pre-emergence herbicides that you put in your yard, like dithiopyr and prodiamine, those will also help control broadleaf weeds, especially annual ones. And perennial broadleaf weeds, we're typically going to have to use post-emergence herbicides to try to kill, especially perennials. Now the annual ones, you're going to get a lot of them with the pre-emergence. So that's what I was talking about right here, the dithiopyr, the prodiamine. I've used both of these personally. They work great if you don't want to have weeds in your yard. Put them down in about the last 2 weeks of February, and all they need is about a ½ inch of rain to actually activate, and you should have about a weed-free yard. I've never used this one personally, but the good thing about these is they don't move very freely through the soil. Where you put them is they're not going to move much from there, so you don't have to worry about a bunch of runoff.
Right.
Yeah, so now if you go to Dimension is the big one, and your local co-op sells both of these. I'm not sure. These are like your weed and feeds at Lowe's. Co-op, I know sells Dimension by the brand name. And I know they have Prodiamine too. I just can't remember what their brand name of it is. I don't think it's Barricade.
You put those down. And then it doesn't rain.
Yeah, if it doesn't rain for a couple weeks, yes, you need to because they won't activate without about a ½ inch worth of rain. It's not going to go bad, but what we're trying to do is keep stuff from germinating. So if I put this down in February, at the end of February, well, we got a small window before stuff starts germinating in March. That's what we're trying to beat. It's not going to go bad, but we are trying to beat that. All right, post-emergent herbicides are typically auxin inhibitors. Like I said, most effective when the plant is young and actively growing. If we don't have these conditions, our control is going to go way down. So we want to hit them in ideal growing conditions, 2 to 4 inches, and rain in the near future, not directly after you spray, but in the near future, so that you're getting those ideal growing conditions for that plant to readily translocate, and that's what's going to kill it. Like I said, it has almost no effect on old mature plants. You can spray them, and you will get to control some of them you won't. But that's also how you're going to start getting resistant weeds in the ones that you don't. So a couple of examples of post-emergent herbicides. Mecaprop, that's a big one, used in lawns and grasses. Dicamba is a selective one that will not hurt grasses as well. If any of y'all ever use dicamba, be very, very, very careful with it. It's what's known to float and kill plants 2 miles down the road. So moves very easily. And if y'all ever want this is actually more of my specialty is the chemical area. If y'all ever want an actual class on how to properly mix and do all that, when it's safe to spray what herbicide, talk to Carla and we could probably set something up. But this is where this is my actual. And then now you'll have ones at Lowe's called Speed Zone. That's going to have a bunch of these combined. So you see it's got dicamba, the MCPP, the 2,4-D, and then this one right here. The reason they call it Speed Zone is because most of these is going to take at least a week for you to see a difference in your plant. It's got to grow and it's got to cut off that nutrients growing to the plant. This one provides a very, very quick burn down. So it's going to happen in a day, at most 2. It's almost like a contact. But the rest of them is going to take at least a week. If you walk out there for 3 days and you haven't seen a difference, don't just automatically think I've got to respray. Give it at least a week, almost 2 weeks before you think, okay, something didn't work right. Next thing, be responsible. Always be mindful of your spraying conditions. If the wind is over 10 miles per hour, don't go out there and try to spray your weeds. You're not going to be hitting your weeds. You're going to be hitting somewhere down here instead, in the room. If, on the contrary, if the wind is not at least 3 miles per hour, don't spray either, because then it floats. And when it starts floating, it can float up and get to the wind, and it won't be hitting our target. That's mainly for dicamba. Like I said, dicamba is one that can volatilize and move very, very far. That's the reason we also have a bunch of restrictions on dicamba right now. Temperature and timing. Never spray before 2 hours. It's 2 hours after sunrise and 2 hours before sunrise. Don't spray after or before. And the temperature. Huh? Yes, this will typically all be on the label. It sure will. Also, herbicides tend to be less effective if you spray them because the plant's not growing it. And the temperature inversions are a real thing. Very scary. That's when the air down here is hotter than the air up above us by a slight amount. And basically, it's going to take your chemical and send it up into the wind stream, and it might be in Joe Blow's tobacco field 5 miles down the road. And that's when you're going to run into problems because people are going to start asking who sprayed dicamba. Always follow your labeled rates, and always clean up and clean your protective equipment. Wash anything that you sprayed in separately. Don't wash it with your regular clothes. Clean your equipment and dispose of the chemical properly. That's how chemicals get into water streams. If 2,4-D gets into a river, you basically killed all the fish in it. It's highly toxic fish in aquatic life, so just make sure to follow what the label says. So this is just to show a little bit of drift damage right here. You can see it's not killing the plant. Most drift's not going to kill a plant. It's just got the leaves kind of curled. And you can just tell that something's not quite right with the plant. That's kind of what a drift damage of a dicamba. And then right here, this is actually going back to what me and Carla was talking about with the aminopyralids. So you can see we got vigorous growth down here, looks good, but up here, something just doesn't look quite right. That's where they fed hay the last year that had aminopyralids sprayed on it. That's how much that stuff can carry over. So aminopyralids are a real nasty thing and can kill your vegetable garden very, very quick. If you ever buy any manure to compost your vegetable garden with, make sure that the cows were not fed on any pastures that had aminopyralids or any hay that had aminopyralids sprayed on it. Questions?
What is the aminopyralid?
What is the aminopyralid? It's most commonly known as like Grazon next, and that around here, but it's just a form of chemical and it stays in the soil. It stays in the area for, what is it, 18 months, 2 years? Yeah. What's it for? So it's our strongest way to control broadleaf weeds in pasture and keep them controlled. But because of that, when livestock eat it, it passes through livestock, passes through their manure, and then we get what we have now, where people's buying manure, but it's killing their gardens. It's one of the more dangerous. Yeah, exactly. So like you can spray 2,4-D on a pasture and be fine within, I mean, stuff can eat off that pasture the next day and it's not going to transfer through. But the aminopyralid, it's basically like a souped up 2,4-D that's going to stay in the manure for a very long time. So just always make sure to ask somebody if you're buying manure from them, if they fed anything that has aminopyralid. They're supposed to legally tell you, but
You don't do it.
precisely, just always make sure to ask.
So let's hear it. It was very, you're snack field. And you, oh, it's in the middle of the field. No.
So I contacted Black Cow.
Actually, it's restricted for any dairy cow usage. Beef cows, it's not. That's different.
Yeah.
Anyway, I contacted Black Cow. Their state to use the broadleaf plant killer. So they told me I had some problems. They suggest they experiment putting like a couple of beans and one together.
Right.
And the leaves turn funny, and then you know that.
You know, that has something that's chemical that has carried.
Yeah, it's still in the manure.
Right.
Maybe that stands well.
Really, the longest ones that we're worried about right now is the aminopyralids. There's two others that are also a pyralid. I just can't remember the first abbreviation of them. But the most one that's commonly used around here is what we know as aminopyralid. Yeah, it's somewhere around that like 2-year range that if you haven't sprayed it after 2 years, then stuff finally starts getting the chemical finally starts degrading, so that it won't transfer through the animal. Okay, that'll be fine. All right, any other questions?
See if we got any on here.
Well, thank y'all for coming out tonight. Let's see, this is my first person. This is my first
Great
presentation I
job.
gave with extension so far, so.
Yeah, great job, Cody. Appreciate it. Yay.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.
Well, tried.
Okay. Thanks everyone on Zoom. I'm gonna close out the meeting.
Thanks, Carla.
That's fine.